For this lesson, we're going to be taking a positive number and multiplying by a negative one. So, first of all, what happens if you have three negative 2's? Well, let's go ahead and do one negative 2, followed by two negative 2's, followed by three negative 2's. So we hop negative 2, we hop to the left twice, and we do that three times, which we end up at negative 6. Alright, now notice that what we could have done is multiplied 3 times 2 first. So there's 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, positive 3 times 2. And then what we could have done is made that negative, and by making it negative, instead of ending up at positive 6, we move all the way over to the same distance on the number line on the left to end up at negative 6. So if we do 3 times 2 first and then make that negative, we get negative 6 just like we did before. What we're showing is 3 times negative 2 is the same as negative 3 times 2. This also works for 5 times negative 4. We know that to be negative 20, but if we do 5 times 4 first and then make it negative, we get the same answer back. Therefore, 5 times negative 4 is the same as multiplying 5 times 4 and making it negative, or negative 5 times 4. Same for 8 times negative 12. We know that to be negative 96. What we could have done, though, is multiplied 8 by 12 first and then made it negative, and we get the same exact number, and therefore 8 times negative 12 is equal to negative, parentheses, 8 times 12. So what we've shown is a number, any number times a negative number, is the same as putting the negative out front and then multiplying those numbers. And we know that a times b can simplify to just ab, and therefore this is the rule that we are looking at. When you want to simplify a positive number times a negative one, especially when it's variables, you want to write it as negative ab. So the name of this lesson is simplifying a positive number times a negative one. A times negative b gives you negative ab. Let's look at some examples together. If I have a positive number x times a negative number y, how do you think you would simplify that? Well, again, kind of what you're doing is you're just tucking the negative out front, and you're getting rid of this multiplication sign because it doesn't need to be there. So in that way, you can kind of think of your two steps. So notice how we put the negative sign out front, and then we got rid of the multiplication sign. And that's basically all we're doing. But I did show you why that's true, and again, in math, we get so caught up in the methods and how we can quickly do something, we forget why it's true. But don't ever forget why it's true. That will help you always know and understand the concept. So let's read this one together. Let's go ahead and use a different color. A number m times what gives you negative mn. Now notice I couldn't put positive in here, because if I did, I would have no negative. So I can't do that. So it has to be what? It has to be a negative n, right? Let's try that. And again, the way we arrive at that is, since I know that this is a negative right here, then that means this number must be negative as well. And ultimately what's happening is, again, if you want to talk about quick methods and knowing how to do it, this negative is just being moved out front, and this is more or less getting deleted, which ends up with this. Again, when you have, let's get rid of those annotations, when you have m and n are two variables next to each other, there is an implied multiplication symbol in between the two. Okay, what number times negative g gives you negative fg? Now, some of you might be tempted to put negative f there, but if you have a negative f and a negative g, so don't make the mistake of putting a negative number in there, because a negative times a negative gives you a positive. So in other words, it must be a positive times a negative in order to give you a negative product, negative f times g. So therefore the answer is positive f. Okay. Again, this also works with three numbers as well. If we have a positive a times positive b times negative c, our answer must be what? Negative, right? Because you have one negative, an odd number of negatives, which is 1, so your answer must be negative. Again, if you have an even number of negatives, your answer would be positive. So since your answer is going to be negative because you have one negative number, and you have a, b, and c, what do you think the answer is going to be? If you said negative ABC, you are correct. So if we had two negative numbers there, let's get a different color here. If we had two negatives here instead of one, then the answer would have been positive, but we only had one, so it's negative. Okay. A positive number x times positive number y times what gives you negative x, y, z? Well, if both of these are positive and the answer is negative, then this must be what? This has to be a negative number, right? And we have x, y, z on the right, so this must be a negative z. Okay? So, again, we have two positives and negative, and the answer is negative. And again, what you're kind of doing is getting rid of these multiplication signs and taking the negative and moving it up front to arrive at this answer. So once again, this lesson is titled Simplifying a Positive times a Negative Number. And all you're basically doing, once you understand why it's true, of course, which is what I showed you, but all you're actually doing is moving the negative up front and disregarding multiplication sign, because when you have two numbers together, that does mean multiply. And therefore, a times negative b gives you negative ab.